The ornate clock tower of Beacon Hill Preparatory Academy chimed 8 times, its melody a crisp counterpoint to the hushed whispers echoing through the hallowed halls. Sunlight filtered through the stained-glass windows, depicting scenes of scholarly pursuit, painted kaleidoscopic patterns on the polished marble floor. Mary Thompson, clutching a worn copy of Steinbeck, walked with a measured pace, her presence as unobtrusive as the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee mingled in the air, a strangely comforting aroma that did little to soothe the knot of anxiety that had taken root in her stomach. She observed the students, their faces bright with youthful exuberance, their voices carrying snippets of conversations about weekend ski trips to Aspen and summer internships on Wall Street. Each word, each casual mention of privilege, was a subtle reminder of the chasm that separated her from this world. So different, she thought, her fingers tracing the faded cover of her book. A different universe entirely. It was an envy that tugged at her, not exactly. It was a quiet, persistent ache of what could have been, a life unmarred by the shadows of the past. She had walked these halls of academia once, albeit in a different time, a different place. Now, she was a ghost in her own story, a phantom professor haunting the edges of this gilded cage. 2 girls, their blazers adorned with the school crest, hurried past, their chatter echoing down the hallway. And Daddy said if I get straight as this semester, he'll get me the new Mercedes convertible for graduation. The other girl giggled, a sound as light and carefree as the wind chimes tinkling on a summer porch. Lucky you. Mine's promising a trip to the Maldives. Apparently, the cellular service is terrible, but the beaches are divine. Mary's lips tightened into a thin line. Such trivial concerns, such extravagant rewards for achievements that seemed ordinary. Had she ever been so young, so blissfully unaware of the weight the world could carry? She couldn't recall. The memories of her own youth were shrouded in a haze of academic pursuits, the relentless drive to excel eclipsing all else. A boy, his hair perfectly styled, bumped into her shoulder, not bothering to apologize as he continued his conversation on his phone. Yeah, the market's down, but Dad's already figured out a way to leverage it. He says it's all about buying the dip. Mary steadied herself, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before quickly fading into her usual placid expression. She adjusted her glasses, the gesture a small act of defiance against the invisible wall that separated her from this world of inherited wealth and effortless success. She was an outsider looking in, a silent observer in a play she could never join. Her own son, David, would have thrived in this environment, she mused. He had the same quick mind, the same insatiable curiosity. But life had other plans, cruel twists of fate that had snatched away the opportunities she had envisioned for him. The thought, like a phantom limb, sent a sharp pang of grief through her. She swallowed hard, pushing the memory down, burying it beneath the layers of stoicism she had carefully constructed over the years. The bell rang, its shrill tone cutting through the air, signaling the start of classes. The students dispersed, their voices fading into the classrooms, leaving Mary alone in the now empty hallway. The silence, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, felt heavy, oppressive. She took a deep breath, the cool air a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from the stained-glass windows. It was a reminder that despite the outward beauty, the polished veneer of this prestigious institution, there was a chill beneath the surface, a coldness that permeated the very stones of this building. She had come to Beacon Hill Prep seeking anonymity, a refuge from the ghosts of her past. A simple job teaching algebra, a chance to blend into the background, to disappear into the mundane routine of lesson plans and grading papers. But fate, it seemed, had a different script in mind. The universe, with its cruel sense of irony, had placed her in the very heart of the world she had left behind, forcing her to confront the shadows she had tried so desperately to escape. The upcoming faculty meeting loomed before her, a dark cloud on the horizon. Dr. Thornton, with his condescending smile and patronizing tone, would be there, ready to dissect her every word, every action. The anticipation gnawed at her, a slow burn of dread that threatened to consume her carefully constructed composure. She clutched her book tighter, the worn pages a source of comfort in this alien world. Steinbeck, her constant companion, a voice of reason in the chaos of her thoughts. He understood the struggles of ordinary people, the quiet desperation of those living on the margins. He understood the weight of secrets, the burden of a past that refused to stay buried. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing strength from the familiar texture of the book, grounding herself in the solidity of its presence. The battle, she knew, had already begun, and she, the reluctant warrior, had no choice but to fight. The echo of the students' carefree laughter still lingered in the air, a stark reminder of everything she had lost, everything she had to reclaim. And in that moment, a spark ignited within her, a flicker of defiance that grew into a steady flame. She would not be dismissed. She would not be silenced. She would not be invisible. She would face Dr. Thornton and the world he represented with the quiet strength of a woman who had survived the storms of life and emerged, scarred but unbroken. The hallways of Beacon Hill Prep, once a symbol of her alienation, would become her battleground. And she, the forgotten professor, would rise again. The worn oak table and conference room begleamed under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, slanting through the high windows. The scent of stale coffee and something faintly floral, perhaps Professor Williams' perfume, hung in the air. Mary Thompson sat at the far end, her presence as unobtrusive as the chipped porcelain teacup beside her. She'd chosen the seat deliberately, hoping to blend into the background of this weekly faculty meeting. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup, a nervous habit she'd never quite managed to break. Just get through this, she told herself, teach your algebra classes, and go home. The past, with its sharp edges and lingering regrets, was a place she visited less and less these days. It was safer, quieter, to exist in the muted present. Dr. Robert Thornton, the Academy's academic supervisor, stood at the head of the table, radiating an air of self-importance that seemed to expand to fill the room. He adjusted his spectacles, the gesture a subtle performance of intellectual superiority. As you all know, he began, his voice resonating with a practiced authority, Beacon Hill Prep prides itself on its rigorous academic standards. His gaze swept over the assembled faculty, lingering for a fraction of a second on Mary. She felt a prickle of unease, a premonition that the seemingly innocuous statement was directed at her. We strive to cultivate not just knowledge, Dr. Thornton continued, picking up a piece of chalk and turning to the blackboard, but a true understanding of the underlying principles. He began to write, the chalk screeching faintly against the dark surface, a sound that grated on Mary's nerves. A complex differential equation began to unfold on the board, a string of symbols and Greek letters that seemed to writhe like an arcane code. Mary's breath caught. The equation was far beyond the scope of high school mathematics, a problem more suited to an advanced university course. A flicker of something was at recognition, a spark of long-dormant interest, ignited within her. She quickly suppressed it, reminding herself to remain inconspicuous. Don't draw attention. Don't stand out. Dr. Thornton turned back to the room, a smug smile playing on his lips. Since Ms. Thompson will be teaching our algebra students, he said, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that made Mary's stomach clench, perhaps you'd like to try your hand at this? Just to get a feel for the level of academic discourse we encourage here at Beacon Hill. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken judgment. Mary felt the weight of every gaze in the room, some curious, some dismissive, some openly mocking. Professor Williams, from the English department, frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but then hesitated, seemingly deciding against it. Mary's mind raced. She knew exactly what Dr. Thorne was doing. He was trying to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to show her the lowly substitute teacher, that she didn't belong in this hallowed hall of academia. A wave of anger, hot and sharp, surged through her. It had been so long since she'd felt anything this intensely. The years of quiet resignation, the careful construction of her unassuming facade, threatened to crumble. "I'll try," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The words seemed to hang in the air, a small act of defiance in the face of blatant condescension. Internally, a storm raged. Doubt warred with a sudden surge of adrenaline, a fierce desire to prove him wrong, to reclaim, if only for a moment, the part of herself she had buried so deep. She rose from her chair and walked towards the blackboard, each step deliberate, measured. The chalk felt cool and smooth in her hand. The familiar symbols, the language of mathematics, sparked something within her. It was a language she spoke fluently, a world where she had once excelled. The years of teaching basic algebra, of pretending to be less than she was, began to fall away. As she began to work through the equation, her movements became fluid, almost automatic. The complex dance of variables and operators, once a source of intellectual joy, now felt like a weapon, a shield against the condescending stares. With each line she wrote, a sense of purpose, dormant for so long, began to reawaken. Dr. Thornton watched, his initial smirk slowly fading, replaced by a look of bewildered disbelief. Professor Chun, from the science department, leaned forward, his eyes widening as he followed Mary's calculations. A murmur rippled through the room. Mary, lost in the flow of the problem, was oblivious to their reactions. The world narrowed to the equation before her, a puzzle demanding to be solved. The years of self-imposed exile from the world of higher mathematics seemed to melt away, replaced by the sharp focus of a mind rediscovering its true element. When she finally wrote the solution, a simple, elegant expression, the silence in the room was absolute. Then, Professor Chun let out a low whistle. "Remarkable," he muttered, shaking his head. Professor Williams' face broke into a wide, approving smile. Dr. Thornton cleared his throat, his face flushed. "Well," he stammered, "that was unexpected." His words hung in the air, a hollow echo of his earlier arrogance. Mary turned to face him, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "Unexpected, perhaps," she said, a hint of steel in her tone, "but not impossible." The quiet resignation that had cloaked her for so long had vanished, replaced by a nascent spark of something akin to triumph. She knew, in that moment, that her life at Beacon Hill Prep, and perhaps her life in general, was about to change. The chipped teacup on the table seemed a relic from a different era, a time before she had dared to reclaim her own brilliance. The fluorescent lights of conference room hummed a monotonous tune, reflecting off the polished mahogany table. Mary Thompson sat hunched in her chair, the cheap fabric scratching against her skin, a stark contrast to the tailored suits of the other faculty members. Dr. Thornton's voice boomed through the room, each syllable laced with a condescending sweetness that grated on her nerves. He'd just written a complex differential equation on the whiteboard, a smug smile playing on his lips. Mary recognized it instantly, a variation of the Navier-Stokes equations, a monster most undergraduates wouldn't touch. Her stomach churned. This wasn't about demonstrating rigor. It was a public execution disguised as academic discourse. "Now, Ms. Thompson," Thornton began, his gaze fixed on her, "perhaps you could enlighten us with your approach to solving this particular problem? After all, algebra and calculus are fundamentally linked, are they not?" A ripple of hushed laughter went through the room. Professor Chun, head of the science department, stifled cough. Professor Williams, from the English department, shot Mary a sympathetic glance. Mary's fingers tightened around her pen. "He thinks he's caught me off guard. He thinks I'm just a simple substitute, incapable of anything beyond basic algebra." The thought sparked a flicker of defiance in her chest, a tiny ember amidst the ashes of resignation. "Certainly, Dr. Thornton," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. She rose and walked towards the whiteboard, Each click of her sensible heels a small act of rebellion against the suffocating atmosphere of condescension. You want a show? I'll get him a show. As she picked up the marker, a wave of something akin to nostalgia washed over her. The familiar weight of it in her hand, the faint scent of dry erase ink. It transported her back to the lecture halls of MIT, back to a time before everything changed. She pushed the memories aside, focusing on the equation before her. Focus, Mary. This isn't about the past. It's about showing him that you're still here, still capable. With a practiced hand, she began to write, the marker gliding smoothly across the board. The silence in the room deepened, broken only by the rhythmic squeak of the marker against the whiteboard. Each stroke was precise, each symbol placed with deliberate care, a silent testament to years of experience. In her mind, the complex symbols danced, transforming from abstract representations into a flowing narrative of physical phenomena. She wasn't just solving an equation. She was unraveling a story written in the language of the universe. Dr. Thornton's smile faltered. His eyes, initially filled with amusement, now held a flicker of uncertainty. The other faculty members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from polite disinterest to rapt attention. Professor Chen's brow furrowed in concentration, his earlier dismissal replaced by a dawning realization. Professor Williams's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Mary finished, capping the marker with a decisive click. She turned to face the room, her gaze settling on Dr. Thornton. The solution, Dr. Thornton, she said, her voice calm and even, is not as complex as you might have imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He underestimated me. They all did. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Professor Williams was the first to speak. That's absolutely brilliant, she breathed, her voice filled with genuine awe. Professor Chun, after a moment of stunned silence, chimed in, remarkable. I wouldn't have approached it that way. His words, though hesitant, carried a newfound respect. Dr. Thornton's face was a mask of carefully controlled surprise. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Well, Miss Thompson, he began, his voice losing its earlier condescension. That was unexpected. A rather unconventional approach, but effective nonetheless. He paused, trying to regain his composure. Clearly, you have a certain aptitude for mathematics. Mary met his gaze, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. You were right about one thing, Dr. Thornton, she said, her voice soft but firm. Not everyone has the mathematical background required for problems like this. But some of us do. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I should know. I taught advanced fluid dynamics for 5 years at MIT. Before, her voice trailed off, the unspoken words echoing in the room. Before the accident, before the grief, before I retreated into the shadows. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. The revelation hung in the air, thick and heavy, transforming the atmosphere of the room. The condescending smiles were gone, replaced by a mixture of astonishment and respect. Dr. Thornton's carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing a flicker of genuine admiration beneath the surface. He sees me now, not as a substitute, not as a ghost of my former self, but as someone. Mit? Professor Chen's voice was barely a whisper. Mary simply nodded, a quiet confidence blooming in her chest. Yes, MIT. I was there. I was brilliant. And maybe, just maybe, I still am. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. The curriculum discussion felt insignificant, the petty squabbles of the faculty fading into background noise. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with a weight of reassessment. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Thornton approached her, his expression a strange mix of apology and newfound respect. Ms. Thompson, he began, extending a hand, I must admit I misjudged you. Your expertise is clearly wasted in a substitute position. We would be honored if you would consider joining our faculty on a permanent basis. Mary looked at his outstretched hand, then back into his eyes. A wave of emotion washed over her: relief, vindication, a flicker of hope. She took his hand, her grip firm. "I'll consider it, Dr. Thornton," she replied, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "I'll consider it, because maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to come back from the shadows." The stale scent of yesterday's coffee lingered in conference room B, a faint bitterness hanging in the air like a phantom. Sunlight, fractured by the thin blinds, cast stripes across the polished mahogany table, illuminating dust motes dancing in the otherwise still room. Mary sat, hands clasped loosely in her lap, the silence pressing in on her. She'd laid bare a piece of herself, a raw wound she usually kept carefully hidden. The story of her husband, David, his once brilliant mind slowly succumbing to the fog of dementia, had left a hollow ache in her chest. Each word, each carefully chosen phrase, had felt like peeling back layers of carefully constructed normalcy, exposing the vulnerability beneath. Professor Williams' voice, soft yet firm, broke the silence. "Miss Thompson," she began, her gaze conveying a warmth that hadn't been there before. "We had no idea." Mary saw genuine empathy in her eyes, a flicker of understanding that eased the tightness in her throat. She'd expected judgment, the subtle disdain she'd grown accustomed to, not this compassion. "It's difficult," Mary admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the weight of the reality. How could she possibly convey the relentless exhaustion, the constant fear, the slow, agonizing erosion of the man she loved, the daily struggle of holding on to hope while watching it slip through her fingers like sand? Professor Chun, who had earlier dismissed her explanation of the differential equation as a fluke, now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His gaze, once dismissive, now held a mixture of respect and something akin to shame. "I apologize, Miss Thompson," he mumbled, avoiding direct eye contact. "I misjudged you." A wave of weariness washed over Mary. Apologies wouldn't bring back the years she'd lost, the career she'd abandoned, the vibrant, intellectual life they'd once shared. Yet, a small part of her, starved for acknowledgement, clung to the sincerity in his tone. Dr. Thornton cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. He rose from his chair, the movement stiff and formal. His face, usually a mask of professional detachment, was now creased with a complex array of emotions Mary couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Embarrassment? Perhaps even a flicker of genuine admiration. Mary's internal cynicism warred with a sliver of hope. Could this be a turning point? Or just another fleeting moment of polite remorse? "Miss Thompson," Dr. Thornton began, his voice carefully measured, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was unacceptable. I allowed my preconceived notions to cloud my judgment." He paused, as if choosing his words with painstaking precision. "Your brilliance, undeniable." The word, coming from his lips, felt almost foreign. Mary's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of the quiet room. She'd spent so long feeling invisible, her talents buried beneath the weight of her responsibilities, that hearing this acknowledgement felt almost surreal. A dizzying mix of relief and disbelief washed over her. She could barely breathe. He continued, his gaze meeting hers directly. "Mrs. Peterson, our calculus instructor, has recently tendered her resignation. Given your exceptional qualifications," he emphasized the word, a hint of a wry smile playing at the corner of his lips, "we would be honored if you would consider accepting the position." The offer hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. A path back to the world of academia, the world she'd thrived in, the world that had felt so distant for so long. Mary stared at him, her mind racing. Could she do it? Could she juggle the demands of caring for David with the rigors of a full-time teaching position? The exhaustion, the constant worry, the emotional toll, it was almost unbearable at times. But then, an image flashed in her mind. Jessica, her brightest student, her eyes wide with curiosity, her mind eager to absorb every equation, every theorem. The small victories, the sparks of understanding she saw in her students' eyes, those were the moments that kept her going. Those were the moments that reminded her of who she was, what she was capable of. A slow smile spread across Mary's face, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, a smile that hadn't been there in years. It was a smile born not of happiness, not yet, but of hope. A fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to navigate this new path, to balance her responsibilities with her passion, to reclaim a piece of herself that she thought was gone forever. "Dr. Thornton," she said, her voice steady and clear, the quiet resignation replaced by a newfound strength. "I accept." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, the tension finally broken. The faculty, now united in their admiration, exchanged smiles and murmurs of approval. The atmosphere, once thick with judgment and misunderstanding, now buzzed with a shared sense of purpose. In that moment, Mary felt a shift within herself. The weight she'd carried for so long, the burden of her secret, seemed to lessen. She wasn't just a substitute teacher anymore, a placeholder, a temporary fix. She was Mary Thompson, mathematician, educator, a woman with a brilliant mind and a resilient spirit. She was back. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the arched windows of Beacon Hill Prep, cast long, geometric shadows across the polished oak floor of the classroom. Dust motes danced in the golden light, a silent ballet accompanying the rhythmic tap of chalk against the blackboard. 6 months. 6 months since the dust of her former life had begun to settle, revealing the solid ground beneath. Mary Thompson, no longer a temporary fixture, stood at the head of the classroom, her presence as permanent and unwavering as the equation she'd just meticulously inscribed. Nabla superscript 2f equals 0. She smoothed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had once conveyed nervous uncertainty, now imbued with a quiet confidence. "Today we're going to explore the beauty of mathematical proof," she announced, her voice clear and resonant. The muted click of the closing door echoed in the stillness of Dr. Thornton's office, the heavy oak a symbolic barrier against the encroaching evening. Mary Thompson stood for a moment, the faint scent of old books and leather clinging to the air, a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic aroma of the science labs, where she had spent the last few weeks rediscovering a part of herself she thought long dormant. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime spent in the quiet purgatory of self-imposed exile. 6 months ago, she was a ghost, a shadow flitting through the halls of Beacon Hill, content to be overlooked, to blend into the background noise of academia. Now, the weight of that self-imposed invisibility felt strangely foreign. Dr. Thornton gestured towards one of the worn leather armchairs facing his imposing mahogany desk. It was the same chair she had occupied during their first meeting, a meeting etched in her memory with the bitter tang of humiliation. Back then, the chair had felt like a witness to her inadequacy, a silent judge of her perceived failings. Now, it seemed merely a piece of furniture, a prop in a drama that had reached its denouement. She sat, the soft leather a subtle reminder of the comforts she had almost denied herself. "Professor Thompson," Dr. Thornton began, his voice lacking the sharp edge she had come to associate with him. The setting sun cast long shadows across his office, softening the harsh lines of his face. He seemed smaller, somehow, less imposing. Or perhaps it was she who had grown. Mary simply nodded, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. The quiet confidence that had blossomed within her over the past few weeks served as an invisible shield, protecting her from the lingering echoes of his past condescension. She had faced down far more formidable opponents than Dr. Robert Thornton in her life. The challenges of theoretical physics have been a far more daunting adversary than the inflated ego of an academic administrator. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet. "I wanted to apologize," he finally said, the words seeming to catch in his throat. Mary observed him, a flicker of surprise momentarily disrupting the placid surface of her composure. An apology? From Dr. Thornton? The universe was indeed full of strange and unexpected phenomena. He continued, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond her shoulder. From my initial assessment of her capabilities, I was mistaken. Mary's internal monologue word. Mistaken. Such a mild word for the blatant disregard, the thinly veiled contempt he had displayed. Yet, there was a genuine remorse in his tone, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. It was disarming. Dr. Thornton, she began, her voice calm and even, I understand that institutions like Beacon Hill value reputation, prestige. I don't fault you for adhering to those values. He met her gaze then, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Respect? Perhaps even a touch of admiration? The thought, absurd as it seemed, sent a ripple of something akin to amusement through her. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. You don't understand. Or perhaps I didn't. 6 months ago, I thought our job was to maintain that reputation, to protect the image of Beacon Hill at all costs. Now I realize it's about something more. He paused, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken words. It's about helping these students discover what they're capable of. Mary's gaze drifted towards the window, the last vestiges of daylight painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Jessica, the bright spark in her algebra class, the girl who devoured knowledge with an almost insatiable hunger. Jessica, who reminded Mary of a younger version of herself, brimming with untapped potential. He continued, his voice low and almost confessional. Watching you with your students these past few weeks, it's been enlightening. You have a gift, Professor Thompson. A gift for igniting that spark, for nurturing their curiosity. A warmth spread through Mary's chest, a gentle thawing of the ice that had encased her heart for so long. It wasn't just about reclaiming her career, her identity. It was about something more. It was about making a difference, about leaving a mark on the world, however small. Beacon Hill needs you, Professor Thompson, Dr. Thornton said, his gaze now steady and direct. We are officially offering you a full-time position in the mathematics department. With tenure. Mary's breath hitched in her throat. Tenure, security, respect, all the things she had thought were lost to her, now offered back on a silver platter. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very institution that had initially dismissed her was now eager to embrace her brilliance. A faint smile touched her lips. Dr. Thornton, she said, her voice laced with a newfound strength. I accept. The relief on his face was palpable. He extended his hand across the desk. Welcome back, Professor Thompson. As their hands met, a silent understanding passed between them. The past was a prologue, a necessary prelude to this new chapter. The air in the office, once thick with tension and unspoken resentments, now felt lighter, charged with a sense of possibility. The setting sun cast a long, golden ray across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a silent testament to the transformative power of second chances. And Mary, bathed in that golden light, knew that she was finally home. The last rays of the Boston sunset bled through the Gothic windows of Beacon Hill Prep, painting long, skeletal fingers of light across the empty desks. Dust motes danced in the golden shafts, a silent ballet in a room that had, just hours before, buzzed with the nervous energy of young minds grappling with algebraic equations. Mary Thompson sat at her desk, the faint scent of chalk and old paper clinging to the air. Her hand rested on a worn copy of The Scarlet Letter, a book she'd found tucked away in a bottom drawer, its pages brittle with age. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just as Hester Prynne had borne her hidden shame, so too had Mary carried the weight of her past, a secret brilliance masked by a carefully constructed facade of ordinariness. She closed her eyes, the echoes of the day still reverberating in her mind. Dr. Thornton's condescending tone, the initial dismissiveness in the eyes of her colleagues, the flicker of understanding in Professor Williams' gaze each moment replayed itself with crystal clarity. The differential equation, scrawled across the chalkboard in Thornton's flamboyant hand, had seemed designed to humiliate, a public test meant to reinforce her place at the bottom of the academic hierarchy. But for Mary, it had been a lifeline, a chance to reconnect with a part of herself she thought she'd lost forever. The chalk in her hand had felt familiar, an extension of her own thoughts, as she effortlessly navigated the complex mathematical landscape, the solution unfolding in her mind with the elegant certainty of a Bach fugue. She remembered the stunned silence that had followed, the way Thornton's jaw had slackened, his eyes widening with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. The shift in the room's atmosphere had been palpable, a subtle but profound change in the way she was perceived. Professor Chin's hesitant but genuine congratulations. The warmth in Professor Williams' smile, these small gestures, had felt like a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. A sigh escaped her lips, the tension slowly draining from her shoulders. The offer to join the faculty, extended just an hour ago by a humble Dr. Thornton, still felt surreal. A part of her, the part that had grown accustomed to the quiet anonymity of her substitute teacher role, hesitated. Could she really step back into the world she'd left behind? Could she face the inevitable scrutiny, the pressure to live up to the expectations her unexpected display of brilliance had created? Doubt, insidious and persistent, whispered in the back of her mind. The reasons she'd left MIT, the reasons she'd chosen to bury her talents beneath a cloak of mediocrity, were still there, still painful. The memories, sharp and jagged as shards of glass, threatened to pierce the fragile peace she'd found in her self-imposed exile. But then, another image surfaced, pushing aside the shadows of the past. Jessica, her brightest student, her face alight with understanding as Mary explained a particularly tricky concept. The genuine, unadulterated joy in Jessica's eyes, the spark of intellectual curiosity that Mary had kindled, was a powerful reminder of why she had chosen this profession in the first place. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about the quiet satisfaction of nurturing young minds, of sharing the beauty and power of knowledge. Mary opened her eyes, the last vestiges of doubt melting away. The setting sun had cast long shadows across the classroom, transforming the familiar space into something almost magical. The dust motes, still suspended in the air, seemed to shimmer with an inner light. She stood up, her gaze sweeping over the empty desks, each one representing a potential for growth, a chance to inspire. The weight of the past, though still present, no longer felt like a burden. It was a part of her story, a testament to her resilience, a reminder of the strength she possessed. She had chosen to hide, to protect herself from the pain of the past. But in doing so, she had also hidden from her own potential. Tonight, however, something had shifted. The unexpected challenge, the public display of her abilities, had forced her to confront her fears, to acknowledge the part of herself she'd tried so hard to suppress. And in that confrontation, she had found not only the courage to embrace her true self, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The Beacon Hill prep that she walked out of that evening was not the same one she had entered just a few months ago. The tentative, almost apologetic substitute teacher had been replaced by a woman who knew her worth, a woman ready to reclaim her place in the world. The silence of the empty classroom was no longer a symbol of her isolation, but a pregnant pause, a moment of quiet contemplation before the beginning of a new chapter. The air, thick with the scent of chalk and old paper, no longer spoke of dusty obscurity, but of the promise of knowledge, the power of resilience, and the enduring beauty of a second chance. And as Mary stepped out into the cool Boston evening, a faint smile played on her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey ahead, a journey she was now ready to embrace, not with resignation, but with a heart full of hope.